Welcome back to the deep dive. I have a confession to make right off the top.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is an ominous way to start a session.
It's a little embarrassing, actually. When I saw the topic for today was world building, I almost skipped.
Really?
Yeah, my brain immediately went to a very specific, very nerdy place. I pictured, a guy in a basement surrounded by graph paper.
Meticulously drawing coastlines.
Exactly. Figuring out the tectonic plate movements of a planet that doesn't exist, the whole 9 yards.
The geology of Middle-earth syndrome. I know it well.
That's it. And I thought, look, I'm not writing a 900-page fantasy epic about elves, so why do I care? But then I started reading through this packet.
Yeah.
And I realized I was completely fundamentally wrong. The insights here, specifically from the Wrestling with Words channel, they just reframed the whole concept for me.
You were. And honestly, that's the biggest hurdle with this topic.
Yeah.
We tend to think of world building as lore. We think it's the appendix at the back of the book with the family trees and the pronunciation guides.
Right. The stuff you skip.
The stuff most people skip. But the core argument here, the thing we really need to dig into, is that world building isn't about the map. It's about the rules of the world.
Okay, the rules. Unpack that for me.
It's the underlying logic. And those rules apply whether you're writing about dragons and spaceships or a coffee shop in Ohio.
The coffee shop in Ohio. See, that's what clued for me.
Precisely. If you are writing a romance set in a small town, you are world building. You have to decide, is this the kind of town where everyone knows everyone's business?
Is gossip the main currency?
Exactly. Is there a class divide between the north side and the south side of the track? Does the local diner serve oat milk, or will they look at you like you've grown a second head if you ask for it?
That is world building.
That is world building. It's the texture of the reality you're creating.
It makes it feel so much more tangible, It's not this abstract, high-concept thing just for the sci-fi and fancier crowd.
Not at all.
Yeah.
World building is simply understanding the world a story takes place in and, maybe more importantly, how that information gets relayed to the audience. It is the mechanics of immersion.
Immersion, that's the key word. We've all read those books where you just bounce right off the page. You can't get into it because it feels fake. Or worse, it feels like a lecture.
Or the opposite. It feels so chaotic and underdeveloped that you don't know which way is up. The rules keep changing.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is to move beyond that cool facts version of world building. We're not here to talk about how to design a magic system or how to name a starship.
Important, but a different conversation.
A very different conversation. Today, we are here to uncover the 7 signs that a writer is world correctly.
And correctly here doesn't mean following some rigid academic rule book. It means creating a setting that serves the story, that elevates it, rather than distracting from it.
Right. We've got a really interesting roadmap ahead of us. We're going to break down some concepts that I honestly hadn't thought about before, like this hierarchy tale.
The bucket theory. I love that one.
The bucket theory of what matters and what doesn't. And something called the rule of...
And, my personal favorite, we're going to finally settle the score on show, don't tell, because the way that advice is usually given is, well, it's a bit misleading.
I cannot wait for that part. But first things first, let's start with the first big sign that you're on the right track. The source calls this intentionality. Now, this sounds like a buzzword.
It does, doesn't it? Be intentional. It sounds like something a yoga instructor would tell me before a difficult pose.
Right. But in writing, it's fundamental. Lack of intentionality leads to what the source calls the default trap.
The default trap. This is a big one.
Walk me through that. What does the default trap look like in the wild?
It's when you reach for a trope because it's a safety blanket. It's easy. Let's say you decide, I want to write a fantasy novel. Your brain immediately serves up a checklist.
Okay, fantasy, I need elves. I need dwarves. I need a gloomy tavern where the hero meets a mysterious hooded stranger.
You're buying the fantasy starter pack.
Yes, you're downloading the preset assets from the video game of writing.
That's a perfect way to put it. You're installing the default. But you haven't stopped to ask the most important question. Why? Why are there elves in your story?
And if the answer is just because it's fantasy, and you're in the trap.
You're deep in the trap. If your elves are just tall, pretty humans with pointy ears and a slightly arrogant attitude, why aren't they just tall, pretty, arrogant humans?
Right. If you could swap them out for humans and the story doesn't fundamentally change, then the elves are just window dressing. They're an aesthetic.
Precisely. They're clutter. If they don't serve a thematic purpose, if their long lives don't challenge the protagonist's view of mortality, for example, or if they don't represent a dying connection to a magical natural world, then they are just there because the author thinks they should be there, not because the story needs them.
So intentionality is about interrogation. You have to interrogate every single choice you make about your setting.
You have to ask, does this element, this hoverboard, this ancient prophecy, this specific cafe that only serves single-origin pour-over coffee, does it serve one of the 5 core elements of fiction?
Which are, let's list them, POV, characters, themes, plot, and setting itself.
If it doesn't plug into at least one of those in a meaningful way, it's probably a default. It's probably just noise.
The source brings up N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy as the absolute gold standard for this. And I'm so glad because that series it broke my brain in the best possible.
It is a masterclass in intentional world building. Nothing is wasted.
Okay, so for those who haven't read it, give us the quick setup. It's set on a supercontinent called the Stillness.
A very ironic name.
Because the world is constantly ending. The Earth itself is unstable. There are these massive civilization-ending earthquakes and volcanoes all the time. They call them fifth.
But notice how Jemison uses that. The geology, the tectonic instability, it isn't just background wallpaper to make things feel gritty. It's the engine of the entire story. Well, the magic system, it's called Araja, is based on the ability to perceive and manipulate that seismic energy. The people who can do it, the origin, can quell earthquake or assert them.
Which makes them incredibly powerful and incredibly feared.
And there's your entire social hierarchy built on the fear and oppression of the very people who can save the world. The whole society is structured around controlling them. The theme of the book is about broken systems, systemic oppression, and what it means to survive in a world that is actively trying to kill you.
So everything is connected. The rocks in the ground are connected to the magic, which is connected to the politics, and the class, which is directly connected to the main character's personal trauma.
Exactly. You literally cannot tell that story in any other setting. You couldn't just pick up the plot of The Broken Earth and drop it into a generic medieval Europe setting or even a futuristic city on Mars. The whole thing would just collapse into nonsense.
That's a really good test. If you can take your plot and your characters, move them to a completely different world, and the story still work, your world building might...
It implies a deep lack of intentionality. It suggests the setting is just a state, not a living, breathing part of the story. The setting should be a character in its own. It should push back.
Now, another part of this intentionality that I found fascinating was the deep connection to point of or POV. The source makes this point that world building should be filtered through the character's eye.
This is one of my favorite insights from this entire deep dive because it's so often overlooked. We tend to think of the world as this objective, static encyclopedia that exists outside the character, a collection of facts.
A wiki page that the author has.
Right. But in a story, the world only exists as the character perceives. There is no objective world. There's only subjective experience.
The example given was Arkady Martine's A Memory Called Empire, which I loved.
A brilliant book. And a perfect example. In that book, the protagonist is an ambassador named Mahid Nair.
And that's a very specific job description. She's not a warrior, she's not a thief or a scientist, she's a diplomat.
Correct. And because her entire profession is about observation, communication, and understanding culture, she doesn't notice the things a soldier or a thief might notice.
So a soldier might walk into the emperor's throne room and immediately clock the number of guards, the escape routes, the materials the walls are made of, potential weaknesses.
A threat assessment. But Mahit, the diplomat, she notices culture. She notices custom. She notices the subtle nuances of language, specifically how the Tixkalani Empire uses poetry in its formal court.
And crucially, she loves the empire. She's obsessed with its culture. She grew up reading its poetry.
That is the key. That is the filter. Because she is fascinated by this place, the world building we get feels lush and beautiful, and we are exploring the empire through a lens of wonder and intellectual curiosity.
But if the protagonist were, say, a prisoner of war from a conquered planet,
that same beautiful, gleaming city would be described very different. It wouldn't be a center of culture. It would be a fortress, a cave, a monument to oppression. The facts of the world might be the same. The walls are still high. The guards are still on. But the world building, the experience of that world for the reader, would be completely...
So great world building isn't just an encyclopedia entry. It's not a travel guide. It's a perspective. It's got an attitude.
Exactly. It isn't just, here's a tall stone wall. It is, here is the wall that keeps my family safe, or here's the wall that keeps me trapped. The emotional context is everything.
That really drives home the idea that you can't separate the setting from the character, which I think leads us directly into the second sign, which is about where that perspective actually comes. The source calls this one expanding understanding.
Right. And this part speaks to the inherent curiosity of writers. It's one of their superpowers. The idea is that good, authentic world building often comes from the writer learning something new in the real world, actually studying a topic in depth, and then incorporating the logic, texture of that knowledge into their fiction.
I love this because it basically justifies all the weird Wikipedia rabbit holes I go down at 3 a.m.
Writers are professional rabbit hole explorers. It's part of the job description. And the source argues that you can really tell when a writer has done their homework, not just on lore, but on how things actually work in reality.
There was this great case study in the source material about a painter. The source, who is a writer and editor, talked about trying to write a short story where the magic system is based on art.
Right. The concept was that by capturing the true essence of a thing in a painting, you could gain a kind of magical power over it. It's a cool concept, but there was a huge problem.
The writer isn't a painter.
Not even a little bit. They admitted they didn't know how to hold a brush properly. They didn't know the difference between gouache and acrylics or what gesso was for.
So what did they do? They didn't just guess. They didn't just watch a few YouTube videos and call it a day.
No, they went and took classes. They mentioned using Skillshare specifically, taking foundational courses on color theory, mixing paints, understanding different brush types.
And here's the crucial part, right? They didn't do it just to learn the technical manual of painting so they could sprinkle in some jargon.
No, that's the shallow version. They did it to understand how an artist sees the world, how an artist's brain is wired differently.
That's the shift. It's not about knowing which brush is called a filbert brush. It's about understanding the artistic gaze.
Exactly. A trained artist notices things the rest of us filter out. They notice light and shadow and hue and composition in a way that a politician or a soldier or an accountant simply doesn't.
I can really imagine. If a soldier walks into a room, they're doing that threat assessment we talked about. They check the exits, assess the sight lines, maybe notice the structural integrity of the walls.
Right, but the painter walks into that same room and notices that the late afternoon light hitting the west wall is a bruised peach color. They notice the specific texture of the velvet curtain. They see the composition of the furniture and the negative space around it.
And by taking those classes, the narrative voice of the writer's story completely changed. It wasn't just he painted the bowl of fruit. It became a description of capturing the subtle reflection of the blue bowl on the whack-in of a red apple.
And that makes the magic system feel earned. It feels real.
Yeah.
Because the character treats it like a craft with specific terminology, specific process, and specific sensory details. It's not just waving a wand and saying magic.
So the application here for anyone listening is pretty broad. If you're trying to write a space opera, maybe go and actually read up on orbital mechanics or fluid dynamics.
Or submarine warfare. The principles of operating in a three-dimensional hostile environment are fascinating and could add so much text.
Or if you're writing a political thriller, don't just guess what diplomats sound like based on movies. Go read some actual declassified diplomatic cables, see how they're phrased.
It fuels the authenticity. If a writer finds themselves researching these seemingly obscure topics, fluid dynamics, 17th century art history, the mating habits of bombardier beetles, to better understand their own setting, they're on the right path. That genuine curiosity bleeds onto the page and makes the world feel lived in and real.
Stops it from feeling like a cardboard set that's just been painted to look like a city. But, okay, let's unpack this because there's a danger here. We've got intentionality and we've got curiosity. But now we run into a very common problem.
I can guess exactly what it is.
It's the look what I learned problem. I've done all this. I now know everything there is to know about fluid dynamics and beetle mating. I have a 3-ring binder full of notes. I am so excited about this knowledge. I want to tell the reader.
And that is how you kill a story stone dead.
The dreaded info dump. The textbook effect, as the source calls it.
Yes, you absolutely cannot just vomit your research onto the page. This brings us to the third and maybe most practical sign. I think this is my favorite framework from this entire deep dive.
Me too. The bucket theory, or the hierarchy of world building.
I am a sucker for a good organizational system, and this one is brilliant.
Okay, let's break this down. The source divides all your world building details, all your hard-earned research, into 3 distinct buckets: core, peripheral, and indulgent.
It is an incredibly useful tool for filtering information, both for yourself as the writer and for the reader. Let's define them first.
All right, bucket 1, core.
Core details are the absolute essential. These are the elements that are foundational to the story, the plot, and the character's journey. Without these details, the book doesn't happen. These are the load-bearing walls of your house.
If you take a core element out, the entire roof caves in, the story stops making sense.
Exactly. Then you have bucket 2, peripheral.
Peripheral, okay.
These add depth and contact. They're important for making the world feel real and lived in, but they aren't key to understanding the central plot. To continue the house analogy, these are the furniture and the decorations in the room. We know they are there. They might play a role in the background, but they aren't holding the house up.
And finally, bucket 3.
Indulgent. This is the fun stuff. The stuff that builds immersion and vibe, but contributes little or nothing directly to the plot. In fact, the source makes the fascinating point that many indulgent details might not even appear on the page at all.
Wait, hold on a second. They might not even be in the book.
Not directly, no. They might just exist in the writer's head or in their notes.
That feels so counterintuitive. I spent 3 weeks figuring out the complete genealogy of the royal family going back 6 generations, and I put that in my indulgent bucket.
Yeah.
You're telling me I shouldn't put it in the book? That hurts my soul a little.
It hurts the ego, for sure, but it saves the story. Think about it this: knowing that entire genealogy changes how you, the writer, write the current king. If you know his great-grandfather was a brutal usurper who murdered his way to the throne, maybe the current king is deeply paranoid. Maybe he hates open windows. Maybe he has a nervous echic.
So you don't explain the whole family tree to the reader. You just show the king being weirdly paranoid.
Exactly. The reader sees the effect, the paranoia. But you, the writer, know the cause. It's the classic iceberg theory. The reader only sees the 10% above the water, but they can feel the weight of the 90% below. The indulgent bucket is that 90%. It creates texture and informs your choices, but you don't force the reader to scuba dive down and examine the whole iceberg.
The source gave a really concrete example of this using a book called The Mountain. Let me walk through that because it really helped me visualize how this...
Absolutely. The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor, it's a perfect case study. The premise is a near-future world where most marine life is extinct, but a reclusive scientist discovers a species of octopus that has developed complex communication and a true culture.
Okay, so clearly the octopus is the core.
It doesn't get more core than that. The specific ecology of the ocean, the environmental state of the world that led to this, and most importantly, the social makeup of that octopus species. That is the core. That is what the book is about. The entire plot revolves around trying to communicate with them and understand them. You cannot skip those details.
Got it. So what's peripheral in that story? What's the furniture in the...
Well, the book also features advanced AI, global politics, and powerful regional governments. We know they exist. There are androids who act as translators. There are massive tech corporations funding the research. These things influence the characters in the plot. Maybe they need funding from the corporation, or they use an android to help with the dangerous research.
But the book isn't about the AI. It's not a deep dive into the ethics of artificial consciousness.
Exactly. It isn't a thesis on the future of AI programming. So the AI is peripheral. It's there, it feels solid and real, but we don't get a 50-page lecture on how its positronic brain works. It serves the story, but isn't.
Which brings us to the indulgent bucket. What's in there?
The specifics of modern warfare in this future. The exact nature of the global political standoff between the United States and China. Those things are alluded to for flavor, to show that the world is bigger than just this one research state. But they are not explained in detail. We don't need to know who the president is to understand the story about the octopus. That's indulgent.
That makes so much sense. I feel like a lot of writers, and honestly a lot of game masters running Dungeons & Dragons games, get this completely wrong. They try to make everything core.
And that leads to reader fatigue. You cannot ask a reader to memorize the genealogy of the royal family, the mechanics of the warp drive, indeed agricultural exports of the southern provinces, if only one of those things actually matters to the plot you're telling.
It's like highlighting every single sentence in a textbook. If everything is highlighted, nothing is highlighted. It all becomes meaningless noise.
Exactly. But here is where it gets really, really interesting. The source points out that these buckets core, peripheral, indulgent, they aren't static. They change depending on whose head we are inside.
The POV shift factor.
Yes, this is brilliant.
The scenario used was a dual POV story. On one hand, you have a queen of a declining kingdom. On the other, you have a monk in a secluded monastery in that same.
Okay. Think about what is core for a queen. What does she wake up thinking?
Money, the state of the treasury, the loyalty of her army, alliances with neighboring countries.
The treasury, the alliances, the grain reports from the provinces, the loyalty of her generals, the tax rates. If she walks into the throne room, she notices if the guards are well equipped. She notices if the foreign ambassador looks happy or angry. That is core to her survival and the survival of her.
Does she notice the dust on the high stained glass windows?
Probably not. Or if she does, it's just a passing annoyance. It's indulgent background noise to her. She'll just tell someone to clean. Now let's swap the camera. Put us in the head of the lowly monk, whose entire job is to scrub the floor of that very throne room.
He definitely notices the dust. The dust might be the most important thing in his world.
The dust is his entire, the specific type of soap he's using, the ache in his knees from the cold stone, the profound silence of the room before the court arrived. That is core to him. That is his reality.
And the ambassador shouting at the queen about a trade dispute.
That's just background.
Yeah.
That's peripheral at best. He probably doesn't even understand the politics. He just hears loud, angry voices. Then he'll have to clean up a spilled goblet of wine later.
This explains why some books feel so real. It's because the author understands that reality shifts depending on who we are. We aren't getting a single objective Wikipedia article about. We're getting slices of individual people's lives.
It creates a true texture of reality. We all live in the same world, but my core world, the things that matter to my daily plot, is very different from your core world. If the writer started explaining the kingdom's tax code while we were in the monk's POV, it would feel completely wrong. It would feel like a clumsy info dump.
Deep. Okay, so we have our buckets. We know know how to sort our information. But even within that core bucket, you can't just throw everything at the reader at once. This leads us, I think, to the fourth sign, the rule of...
This is a rule of restraint and focus. The advice is to focus heavily on only 3 main world-building pillars for your story.
Only 3? That sounds incredibly restrictive. If I'm building a whole galaxy with aliens and empires, surely I need more than 3 things.
It sounds restrictive, but it's actually liberating. Think about cooking. If you throw 50 different spices into a soup, what does it taste like?
It tastes like mud. It tastes like confusing brown mud.
Exactly. It's just noise. But if you focus on 3 strong, complementary flavors, say ginger, garlic, and chili, you have a distinct, powerful flavor profile. The danger zone in world building is creating a world that is wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle.
Oh, I have read those books. I think
Wow.
we all have. The ones where they mention 50 different cultures, 20 religions, and 12 types of magic, but you never really understand any of them in a meaningful way. It feels like a checklist the author's ticking off.
It's the kitchen sink approach. Just throw everything in. But if you pick 3 pillars, say your story focuses on a unique magic system, a rigid class structure, and a world with dangerously unpredictable weather, and you go deep on those 3 things, the world feels massive. Because the reader assumes that if these 3 things are this detailed and interconnected, then everything else must be too.
It's an illusion of depth that's created by having actual depth where it counts.
Precisely. Which brings us quite naturally to the 5th sign, depth itself.
What defines depth in this context? Is it just about having a lot of words, a lot of pages of notes?
No, not at all. Depth is about capturing the essence of your world and showing how that essence impacts conflict on every level, socially, physically, and culturally. It's about consequences and interconnected.
The source used a great phrase. World building should make the story.
We touched on this with The Broken Earth, but let's look at some smaller scope examples. Think about Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro.
Right. That's a very quiet, atmospheric, soft sci-fi.
It is. The scope is tiny. It's mostly set inside one house and its immediate surroundings. The whole story is about a solar-powered android designed to be an artificial friend for a sickly teenager.
There are no space battles, no galactic empires, none of that.
No. But the depth comes from Ishiguro's relentless exploration of the social impact of that one piece of technology. What does it mean for loneliness? What does it mean for parenting? If you can buy a perfect, loving friend for your child, does that mean you failed as a parent? What is the definition of a soul if you can manufacture a personality?
So the depth isn't in the technical specs of the robot's power. It's in the emotional and philosophical ripples that the robot causes in the lives.
Exactly. Another fantastic example is Severance, the TV show. A very, very tight world. Basically one office building and a few houses. But the central concept, a technology that allows you to surgically split your memories between your work life and your personal life, is explored to its absolute limit.
The corporate culture in that show feels terrifying. The weird, almost religious reverence for the company founders, strange non-monetary rewards like waffle party, finger trap toys. It feels like a real fun cult.
And that depth, that commitment to exploring the consequences of its one big idea, is what makes it so immersive and unsettling. But the example that really surprised me, and I think the listeners will appreciate this, was The Wire.
Yes, I was so happy to see The Wire in here.
Because The Wire isn't sci-fi. It isn't fantasy. It's a cop show set in Baltimore in the early 2000s. A real place, a real time.
But the source argues it is an absolute master world.
And I could not agree more. Think about the experience of watching The Wire for the first time. It forces the viewer to learn its world. You have to learn the language, the slang of the corner boys, the bureaucratic acronyms of the police department, the political jargon of the school system.
It never stops to explain what a burner phone is, or what re-up means, or what juking the stats means for the police command.
No. It pulls no punches. It has total confidence in its world, and it expects the audience to keep up. It treats Baltimore not just as a location, but as a distinct world with its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own gods, and its own monsters.
I remember watching the first few episodes and feeling like I was visiting a foreign country, even though it's just an American city. I needed subtitles for the slang.
That is successful world. It proves that this concept is just as vital in a realistic crime drama as it is in a sprawling space opera. It's about creating a complex, coherent system that the reader or viewer can inhabit and eventually learn to navigate.
That is such a great takeaway. World building isn't a genre feature. It's just deep, rich, intentional context.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've got our pillars, we've sorted our buckets, we've gone deep. Now we need to talk about the nuts, the actual mechanics of writing. How do we get this information from our brain onto the page and into the reader's brain without boring them? We have to talk about the
The great commandment, written in stone above every creative writing workshop door,
Show don't tell.
groans slightly. The single most misunderstood piece of writing advice in the history of literature.
The source actually calls it a myth, or at least it calls for a radical reframing, because if you literally showed everything, your book would be 10,000 pages long and completely impossible to...
Exactly. You'd have to show the character brushing their teeth every morning. The sixth sign isn't don't tell, it's knowing when to show and when to tell.
So when do we tell? When is it okay to break the sacred?
We tell when we are dealing with the logical side of things, factual details, specific memories, or when we need to convey information quickly to get back to the action. Telling is for efficiency. It's your story's fast-forward button.
The source gave a fantastic text example here, contrasting two versions of the exact same. Let's look at the telling version first. This is a summary of a difficult journey where a group has to leave a companion behind.
Right. It goes something like this. We broke camp before dawn. We walked all day across the frozen tundra. We found a trickle of fresh water. The patrols from the Citadel got more frequent. We had to leave Gilbert behind.
We had to leave Gilbert behind. That's so brutal in its brevity.
It is. But notice what this telling does. It skips the boring, repetitive parts, the mechanics of setting up camp, the unchanging topography, the blisters on their feet, to focus on the key plot points. They're moving. They're in danger. And they made a hard choice. It moves the plot efficiently from point A to point B.
If you tried to show every single step of that 3-week journey, the reader would just put the book down.
They'd be bored to tears. Telling is for managing pace. But then, of course, we have the flip side. When do we show?
The emotional side.
Yes. You show when you want emotional interpretation, ambiguity, or a deep internal reaction. You show when the goal is to make the reader feel something, not just know something.
Let's look at the showing version of that same scene with Gilbert. This was so powerful. Instead of just stating, we left him, the narrator starts to obsess over tiny details.
Specifically, Gilbert's terrible choice in footwear.
His open-toed shoes.
He brought open-toed shoes to the frozen waste. And the narrator doesn't stop there. They also mention his real furs.
That is such a specific, devastating image. You just picture his toes turning blue in these expensive, useless sandals.
And that is world building through character perspective. It tells us everything we need to know about the class structure of this world without a single sentence of explanation. Gilbert has real furs, which means he has money. He's rich, but he has open-toed shoes, which means he has absolutely no idea what real hardship is.
He's a soft city boy who thought this was going to be a fun, rustic adventure.
Exactly. And the fact that the narrator is the one noticing it, and noticing it with such bitter focus, tells us that the narrator isn't soft. The narrator looks at those shoes with a toxic mix of pity, contempt, and maybe even a little guilt.
So we learn about the cultural divide between the city and the wild, not through a history lesson, but through the visceral image of a pair of impractical.
That is showing. It gives us class resentment, guilt, the harshness of the environment, and a character judgment all in one tight sensory image.
So the synthesis here is rhythm. It's a dance. You need to tell to move the plot pieces across the board, and you need to show to make us care about.
Ideally, you want a heartbeat of both. Tell, show. If you only tell, you have a dry history book. If you only show, you have a beautiful but confusing impressionist painting that takes forever to decipher.
We're moving through these signs at a really good clip. Covered intentionality, curiosity, the buckets, restraint through the rule of 3, depth. Now we have one major sign left, the backbone.
The seventh sign, consistent.
This feels like the most obvious one, right? If you say the sky is green and the gravity is low on page 10, it had better be green and low on page 300.
It sounds obvious, but it is arguably the hardest thing to maintain, especially a long, complex story or a multi-book series. And a single moment of inconsistency can break the spell of immersion immediately.
It's the glitch in the matrix. It yanks the reader out of the story. If the rules you established suddenly stop working for no reason, the reader stops trusting the writer.
The source talks about something called the bloom effect. As a story goes on, the world naturally gets bigger. It blooms, revealing new facets, but it must always stay consistent with the seed that was planted on page 1.
The example given for this was a big one, Stephen King's The Dark Tower.
A massive, sprawling series, over 4,250 pages, written over decades.
And that world it's profoundly. It's got gunslinging cowboys, it's got high magic, it's got sentient decaying robots, it's got portals to our New York City, it's got post-apocalyptic trains that like to tell riddles.
It is a genre mashup of the most epic purport, and by all rights it should be a total mess. But it worked because the internal logic, the concept of the quartet and the different levels of the tower remains valid from start to finish. The world expands massively, it blooms, but it never collapses because King adheres to the strange rules he set for himself.
So consistency doesn't necessarily mean realistic, it just means faithful to its own internal logic.
That's the perfect definition. If you establish that your world is weird, you have to be consistently weird in the way
Another great example they used was Disco Elysium, the video game.
a masterpiece of narrative consistency. In that game, you have decades of fictional history, complex political ideologies, different geographical regions, and a host of character perspectives, and they're all perfectly synchronized.
The source mentioned the bird's eye view matching the street.
That's a fantastic way to put it. The abstract political theory you read about in an in-game book perfectly matches the lived experience of the poverty you see on a street corner. The macro history and the micro reality are always aligned.
And if they weren't, if a character said one thing about history and a book said another with no explanation,
The player or the reader would feel cheated. They would feel like the writer is just making things up as they go along to solve plot holes. That's called hand-waving, and it is the absolute enemy of immersion.
So consistency isn't just about avoiding simple continuity errors like changing a character's eye color. It's about building trust. You are asking the reader to trust that this fictional world is real enough to invest in.
Exactly. If you break your own rules, you break that trust, and it's very, very hard to win back.
Now, there was a little bonus sign mentioned at the very end, and I think for anyone listening who actually wants to sit down and write, it might be the most important one of all.
The enjoyment factor.
Yes, if the writer is having fun building the world, if they are genuinely fascinated by their own creation, the reader can usually feel it. That joy is palpable.
It's surprisingly transparent. You can tell when a writer is slogged down by their own lore, when they feel obligated to include details, and you can absolutely tell when they are delighted by their world and can't wait to show you the next cool thing.
It's like Mahi, the diplomat in a memory called Empire. The author clearly loved exploring the nuance, takes Kalanli poetry. So we, the readers, loved her enthusiasm became our.
If the process of world building aids your writing, if it sparks ideas and makes you excited to get to the page, then it's being done correct. That's the ultimate validation. All these other signs, the buckets, the rule of three, the intentionality, they are tools. They are scaffolding. They are meant to help you build the house, not become a prison.
If you're getting stressed out about whether a specific detail belongs in your peripheral or indulgent bucket, you're probably missing.
Exactly. The goal is the joy of creation and the service of the story.
I love that. What a great place to land. So let's just quickly recap this whole journey. We started with intentionality, knowing why you're using a trope instead of just defaulting to it. We moved to curiosity, using real-world knowledge to fuel the fiction. We organized our mess with the bucket hierarchy core, peripheral, indulgent.
Then we learned restraint with the rule of three and how to create the illusion of breadth through actual depth.
We mastered the rhythm of show versus tell, and we'll never forget poor Gilbert's open-toed shoe. And finally, we locked it all down with the bedrock of consent.
It is a really comprehensive and I think very practical framework. And what I love most about it is that it applies to everyone, not just the epic fantasy writer.
That's the big takeaway for you, the listener, right? Whether you are writing a novel or running a D&D campaign for your friends next Tuesday, or honestly just analyzing your favorite TV show on a deeper level.
Look for the why. When you see a detail in a story, a piece of technology, a line of dialogue about the past, a strange custom past, ask yourself, is this here just to fill space? Or is it here to show me who this character is and what this world is really about? Is this detail core to the story, or is it just indulgent flavor?
It completely changes how you consume media. You start seeing the scaffolding, the intentional choices behind everything.
It does. It makes you appreciate the craft so much more.
Yeah.
You see the artistry instead of just the story.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone with a final provocative thought. It popped into my head while we were discussing the indulgent bucket.
Let's hear it.
The source mentions that indulgent details might not even appear on the page. They exist in the author's mind to make the world feel real to them. They're the background noise that adds texture.
Right. The unseen part of the idea.
So think about your own life. Think about our world. How much of the real world that we live in is actually core to our daily plot?
That is a very provocative question.
I mean, I know how my cars start. That's core to my morning. I know the coffee shop on the corner is open until 6. That's core. But the specifics of, say, the municipal water treatment plant that provides my tap water, or the diplomatic relations between two countries I've never visited.
To you, in your daily story, those are peripheral or even indulgent background. They exist, they are critically important to someone, but they don't drive your personal plot forward.
Exactly. Which leads to the weird thought, maybe we are all just living in someone else's peripheral world building. Maybe we're just the furniture and the main character.
That is a humbling and slightly terrifying thought to end. A real existential kicker.
Just something for you to mull over while you're stuck in traffic later. Are you the protagonist of this story, or are you just background extra number 4? Deep dive complete. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.